Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this video, I would like to answer a question that people keep asking. If Dhul Qarnayn, as mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf, built the dam to block Yajuj and Majuj, where is it today? And a lot of people are concerned that uh, with NASA, with Google Earth, there has been a lot of discoveries, but this dam supposedly big with metal inside of it, how come it's not showing anywhere? So hopefully we'll try today to answer some of these concerns and address some of the questions. So let's start with Yajuj and Majuj in Surah Al-Kahf. First of all, they are mentioned in Ayah 94 in Surah Al-Kahf, where قالوا يا ذا القرنين إن يأجوج ومأجوج مفسدون في الأرض فهل نجعل لك خرجا على أن تجعل بيننا وبينهم سدا. Verse 94, where O Dhul Qarnayn, they said, indeed Gog and Magog are causing tumult on earth, so shall we pay you a tribute so that you erect a dam between us and them. Also in verse 1898 in Surah Al-Kahf, then when there comes to pass the promise of Allah, we will flatten it, the dam. So, two mentions. Actually, these, if you have some time to go back and read them all together, you might get the what the story is talking about. So basically, they asked Dhul Qarnayn, these people, to build the dam because Yajuj and Majuj kept attacking them, invading them, and this will shield them from Yajuj and Majuj. So he said, yes, I will build it for you. And in the story, in the verses between 94 and 98, some of the details of the story. And in verse 98, where he talks about the promise of Allah. So first of all, let's talk about the promise of Allah. There are two possibilities of this. One, considering Dhul Qarnayn, because Allah addresses him directly, we told him. So could be two possibilities. One, he could be a prophet. Two, a follower of a prophet. So when we say the first possibility of the promise of Allah, could be that Allah promised him that this dam, when it fulfills its function, it will be demolished. That's the first option or possibility. Two is the ultimate promise. As we know, the day of judgment is the ultimate promise. So it could be one of these two options. So basically, what I'm trying to point out here is neither option, neither possibility will mean that the demolition of the dam is a sign of the day of judgment, as many people think. So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind. In the Quran and in here, in this explanation, everything I will use is basically in the Quran or Hadith. So there's no room for anything else. If we want an ultimate source, these are the two sources we go to, and everything else, mufassir, a scholar, could be an opinion. But when you look at it at the end of the day, these are the only two sources you take for granted. So that's the first challenge to the myth that people think that the dam will break before the day of judgment as a sign of the end of days. Another point we want to take out of these two verses, that it is clear that Yajuj and Majuj are humans. So nowadays you hear a lot of these stories about Yajuj and Majuj living underground. These people will crawl out. They've been living there for years, millions of them, and they kind of more animal-like. No, it's very clear in the Quran that these are normal people. They were attacking their neighbors. There is nothing, not even a single hint that will insinuate they're anything but humans. The second mention of Yajuj and Majuj is in Surah Al-Anbiya. Actually, these are the only two places, two surahs where it is mentioned. So in Ayah 96 in Surah Al-Anbiya, حتى إذا فتحت ياجوج ومأجوج وهم من كل حدب ينسلون. So as it is translated, I use this translation to explain to people how some of the errors in translation take place. So the Mufassir took it upon himself to insert the dam of. If you see, I have it between parentheses, between brackets, to show that this is not part of the Quran but was inserted. And sometimes the Mufassirin, if they assume something, they put it between brackets. In their mind, that will complete the meaning, but it's not mentioned specifically in the Quran. So the Mufassir says, until when the dam of Gog and Magog has been opened, and they from every elevation descend. Two things to take out of here. One, there's no mention of the dam anywhere in this verse. Very clear. If you read it in Arabic, even in English, if you understand the concept of the brackets, there's no mention of the dam. So the Mufassirin assumed it is because looks like the idea of the dam carried with them, because Yajuj and Majuj are kind of a strange name, not mentioned in the Quran other than in these two places, so they correlated it with what happened in Surah Al-Kahf. So that's one, there's no mention of them. Two, the word futihat, hatta idha futihat. Let me translate this verse word by word to make sure it's clear. Hatta idha, until when, futihat was opened, Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog. So first of all, again, it's clear there's no mention of the word dam or sad, whatever it may be. The word futihat is the feminine version of the verb open. In Arabic, there is a feminine and masculine to each verb. And if the noun is masculine, the verb has to follow. If the noun is feminine, the verb has to follow. So in this case, we have people, most of the mufassirin, most of the scholars, assume they're talking about assume Allah is talking about the dam here. There's a problem with this assumption. Whether we use the word in Arabic sad, which is dam, or radm, as the people asked Dhul Qarnayn, build us a sad, which is a dam. He said, no, I will build you a radm, which is much stronger, much more, it's more of a pile up at the bottom, so it makes it more fortified than the sad. So either one, if we assume either one is meant here, they're masculine. So how can you use a feminine verb along with a masculine noun? Grammatically incorrect. There's one very strong scholar that I like to mention here is Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. He is the founder of the Maturidi madhab. And he made a stop here because most scholars just went on and like it's normal. He said this letter ta in the word futihat is a problem here. At least the good thing he acknowledged that there's a challenge here with the ta for making it a feminine, and he did not continue like most scholars and go beyond what is obvious, that there's no assumption of, could be grammatically incorrect to assume there's a function of, or we're referencing basically the word sad or read. The proper assumption here, if we just look at it for what it is, let's not assume, let's not elaborate, let's just keep it for what it really is. When we read the words حتى إذا فتحت ياجوج ومأجوج, the reference here is to the nations. فتحت ياجوج ومأجوج. The nations of the Yajuj and Majuj were opened. And in the Arabic language, nation is feminine, so فتحت makes sense. For example, I use an example here. When the Romans were defeated in the Quran, Allah mentioned غلبت الروم. غلبت الروم, the Rum nation, which is the assumed word here, was defeated. So غلبت الروم, ta, if you see the ta here in the end of the word غلبت, that's because it's the nation is feminine. So غلبت, the verb will have to go feminine along with it. This makes sense. So if we use the same logic from the Quran, فتحت, the ta here belongs to the nations of Yajuj and Majuj, or Gog and Magog, to be clearly describing it in Arabic and in English. Okay, so in summary, there's no dam here, nor there's a grammatical correctedness if we assume it was talking about the Sad, which again, the conclusion is that there's no Sad, there's no dam. It's what the talk in the Quran is all about, the nations. Let me move forward to a hadith that confused a lot of people, and I'll let you read it on your own. This is the hadith that talks about the nation of Yajuj and Majuj picking in a big wall, and they almost crack it and see the sunlight. Their supervisors say, come back tomorrow, and tomorrow will break through it. They come back tomorrow, and the dam is stronger than the day before, until one day he says, Inshallah. They come back, and it is where they left off. Then they break through and come out. So this hadith is, the challenge is, many of the scholars, including Al-Albani, which many people take his word as the ultimate authority, he made it sahih. It's a da'if hadith, but he made it sahih, and that's, I think, what creating a lot of the confusion with people. So let me go over the flaws in the hadith. First of all, the idea of people digging for thousands of years, picking on a wall and come back the day after and pick, and their supervisor says come back tomorrow. Just honestly, I don't think how anyone can buy this story. It just looks like something out of sci-fi. Two, just kind of wondering, why do people assume that because they saw the sunlight from the crack of the dam that they were underground? There's that conception and theories, and scientists even coming out and say, yes, people can adapt and live underground. I mean, you can be trying to break a wall and you're above ground, and if you see the sunlight coming from the other side, yeah, you broke through the wall. It's that simple. Why do we have to assume they live underground? It doesn't add up. These are the two obvious things. Three, let's talk about the hadith accuracy. So hadith was narrated by Zama, by Qatada ibn Zama, who's a tabi'i. I just want to make sure it's clear, it's not Qatada the Sahabi. So Zama, Qatada ibn Zama, who narrated this hadith from Abu Rafi. Abu Rafi, who's also a tabi'i. So here are the challenges. One, the hadith is based on a single narrator. So reminding people that in Islam, even a small loan between two people, we ask for two witnesses. Some small material transaction, you need two witnesses, two people. So how can you assume, or how can you take on a aqidah principle that you base your life, your understanding of the signs of the day of the hereafter, based on the story of one single person? That's the first thing. Second challenge with this is, many scholars say that Qatada never met Abu Rafi, which makes it a disconnected hadith munqata. And this is another weakness. Three, it's a hadith mawquf, meaning that it's not the narration, the transmission, the chain of transmission, what is called sanad. It stops at a companion, not at the Prophet himself. So that's a hadith mawquf. It's not, could be the Sahabi himself heard it from someone in the Medina, could be a lot of things, but there's no guarantee it came from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The matan, next thing is, which is the text of the hadith itself, conflicts with the hadith sahih. The hadith sahih is when the Prophet ﷺ woke up and said, a hole has been broken, has been opened in the dam of Yajuj and Majuj as such, and he made a ring with his index finger and thumb. So this one signifies that could have been opened during the days of the Prophet. could have been picked and started to deteriorate, demolish, but not as people think. It will be breaking later on as a sign of the hereafter. And finally, number 5, in Surah Al-Kahf, ayah 98, when Dhul Qarnayn talks about, and there comes to pass the promise of my Rabb, he will instantly demolish and flatten the dam. So the talk here is about something instant, major demolition, and this is in big contradiction with people picking it inch by inch, day by day, over thousands of years. That the story doesn't add up. So one, Allah will in the Quran tells us He will demolish it and flatten it, and that's, if you can imagine the strength of the ayah, it's looks like just one hit, one instance, not constant picking. So that's the 5th challenge with this hadith. I mean, 5 challenges. The main one is the weakness of the hadith. Keep that in mind. I mentioned a lot of contradictions, but the bottom line you want to keep in your mind that this is a hadith that's da'if. The narration is weak, and then if you look at the matan, it doesn't even correspond with some hadith sahih and conflicts with the Quran. Okay, let's continue and talk about the function of the dam. So there are 3 phases of humanity. As humanity developed, like everything else, goes into phases. The first phase is the humanity as a single nation, where Adam, Eve, and their sons and family, and that's phase number 1, which makes sense. Next thing is the development phase. So kind of common sense when you ask yourself, how did the Africans develop? Their looks are similar, their language is similar. How did the Orientals develop with the same thing, same culture, same looks? The Europeans, everyone had their own independent identity, language, and culture. So if we look at Surah Al-Hujurat in verse 13, O humankind, we did create you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, so you may learn from each other. So it's Allah's will that we are to be separated into nations, so we can learn from each other, and it's one of Allah's blessings. And basically, from Allah's blessings is He sent every nation their own special prophet to keep them to help develop their identity and keep that nationality, let's call it, unique to that group of people. Then the phase 3, which is let's call it the universal and the final phase, by the way, that's when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent to all of humanity. That by itself, that message helps us understand that this is the universal phase, where one message for all of humanity. Basically, after every nation has its own identity now, it's unique. Allah's opening the world and letting us intermix as multiple countries, with every nation keeping its own identity. This is the Islamic way. This is in contrast with for example, what humans try to do, like communism, where they swallowed these countries, like the Ukraine and Chechnya, and try to erase their identity all under one big nation, which, as we all know, it failed miserably. So let's look at Surah Al-Kahf, verse 99. And we allowed some of them on that day, basically when the dam is destroyed, mingle with the others. So if you recall from before, let's go back actually to Ayah 98 in Surah Al-Kahf, and we talked briefly about uh, when the promise of Allah is to pass, we will flatten it. He will demolish the dam on that day. So that day, it's when we go back to the phases of humanity. On this day, after this day, we will allow the nations to mingle with each other, and then the trumpet will be blown, and then we shall gather them all together. So basically, Allah is telling us that the nations will intermingle. Every nation will maintain its own identity until the day of judgment, and they will intermingle just like waves. So when you, for example, uh, you turn on the radio, every station broadcasts its own wave, and yet miles away you receive the wave in its own clear identity, very clearly, just the way it was broadcasted. And that's the concept of waves. They go together but never cross each other or don't override each other. Everyone still has its own identity, and such is the way nations will communicate, will connect until the day of judgment. So from this, we understand that Dhul Qarnayn, as we said, he was a prophet or a follower of a prophet, basically sent by Allah to help the development of these nations. Uh, just as we develop our children, Allah sent Dhul Qarnayn to help the progress of these nations. And as we notice, all his nations were towards nations. All his trips were towards nations. He visited multiple nations, 5 or 6 if I recall, and dealt with each one at its own level. Some could not understand the word, dealt with them in a basic primitive way. Some were more advanced. Allah said, you either forgive them or punish them. He was given permission to do whatever is needed to deal with this nation at this level. And in the case of this nation, Yajuj and Majuj were constantly attacking, invading this weak nation. So he built the Radam, which is the, like we said, the strong dam with a strong foundation to help isolate this nation and keep the influencers, the influencing nations out of there until such a day when Allah will decree that it will be demolished, and that will be the sign of that's it. Every nation has developed this identity, and there's no concern about them losing that should they intermingle with each other. That was when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came and helped through Islam start the universal phase, which will remain till the end of days, inshallah. So I hope this made sense. I mean, if you look at the Quran, there is multiple contradiction with that story. The hadith itself, the narration, the chain of narration is very weak, and the story itself is just ridiculous, to be honest. So between the Quran and the hadith, and understanding what really is the said, what was it for, it will help us understand. It's not just the wall that was built and okay, in Surah Al-Kahf it was built and that's the end of it. So let's get this story of the dam out of our head when we read Surah Al-Anbiya and focus on what is meant there, what is obvious in the description of this ayah and the ayah before it and the ayah after it. It's talk about nations, not science, not dams.